Did you know that you can write loops in SQL? Yeah. Hi, I'm Brian Amrine with Value Driven Analytics, bringing you at least one analytics training video each week, like the SQL looping video we're about to do today. So please consider subscribing. Now, there are a lot of benefits of using loops when you run into a situation with repeated tasks that are just slightly different. It can save you time. It can make it easier to update your code in the future. It can be more readable for users in the future because your code is more concise sometimes when you use looping. And the alternative is to just copy and paste code multiple times and just adjust things. But imagine trying to update your code later and all the different places you're going to have to update and how much longer your code could be if you were to do that copying pasting approach. Nobody wants that. So whether you're using a language like Python, R, SAS, and yes, even SQL as we'll see today, if you've got repetitive tasks that are just slightly different, think about using a loop. That's what I'll show you how to do right now. So let's head over to SQL Server Management Studio. Here we are in SQL Server Management Studio, and I've already set up a database called Value Driven Analytics. And within that database, I've set up a schema, which is essentially a folder of tables of sorts, and it's called Loop Illustration. And within that schema, I've created one table today, and it's a lead table called leads. It is one row per lead, and we have a few different variables here. I've created the table here. I've inserted some values. We're just going to start off looking at our particular table, and you might have a particular table that you need to loop through, and this concept that we walk through today on the leads table can be applied to any table or looping use case that you have. So let's just take a quick look at our leads table. Select star from the leads table here. You can see we've got 7 leads. Each lead has a name, a state, a marketing channel, a lead submission month. This is set up as a character. It's just the year-month. In this case, it's not really a date variable. And a variable for whether they're converted. It's a binary indicator variable. It's a 1 if they convert it to sale and a 0 if not. So that is our data set. And here's our use case. We would like to do some data exploration. Perhaps we're getting ready to build a model, but at first we just want to do some breakouts. And what we want to do is get a count of the number of leads by several different dimensions that we're interested in and looking at. We want to split the number of leads out by state, by marketing channel, and by lead submission month. Now you can imagine there could be an even longer list of variables and attributes about these leads that we'd want to get a breakdown of leads by. And in this case, we don't just want to get the number of leads, we also want to see what percentage of leads in each of those values within each of those variables, state, marketing channel, and submission month, what was their conversion rate, and kind of get a ranked list of these are the values of state, for instance. These are the states that had the highest conversion rate versus the lowest conversion rate. But we don't just want to do that for state. Again, we want to do it for marketing channel and lead submission month and potentially all kinds of other variables. So if you didn't know how to loop, you would basically probably write a query maybe for state and then copy and paste that multiple times. But with looping, we don't have to copy and paste the code. We can just write the code one time and tell it to loop through and do this same task, but just substitute, instead of state, marketing channel the second time, and instead of marketing channel, lead submission month the third time. And we could do that for as many variables as we wanted to do this operation, this grouping and aggregation operation that we want to do. Just loop through the same code. So much more efficient, so much more concise. Should save us some time, especially as you get more comfortable with the looping syntax, which is what I'm going to walk you through today. You might take the code that we create today, save it somewhere, so that any future looping use cases you run into, you've got sample code ready to go and you can adapt it from there. Let's get into it. So first thing you want to do when you're setting up a loop, I would recommend just setting it up for one particular use case in the loop, just starting out with our sample code. So if I were wanting to group by state, for instance, I would be selecting the state, and I'm going to put it in brackets here because some of our variables the variable names like marketing channel has a space in it. And so if you either need to put double quotes around it or brackets. So I'm going to select the state here. I'm going to do a count star and call that number of leads. This is going to have a space in the name, so I'm putting brackets around it. And then I'm going to take a sum of the converted field, and converted will be the same field every time in the loop, and it doesn't have a space, so we don't need to put quote, double quotes, or brackets around it. So sum of converted divided by count star, so how many leads converted divided by the total number of leads, that should give us, we'll call this percentage converted. Now, if you've ever done division in SQL, hopefully you've realized that if you just do simple division, the rounding is going to throw it off if you just write it like this. And so pretty much anytime I do division in SQL, I'm putting 1.000 times sum of converted divided by count star. I put this 1.000 times. It just makes sure that the no odd rounding happens, that we truly get the division here. So I'll then write a from statement against our table here, a leads table. And of course, because we are selecting a variable that's not aggregated, state in this case, and then we're selecting some aggregated variables, number of leads and percentage converted, we need to group by the variables that aren't being aggregated in our select statement, which in this case is state. Group by state. And let's say we want to see the states at the top that have the highest conversion rate. So we'll add an order by statement, and I'll just copy the definition of my percentage conversion here. We want to see the states that have the highest conversion rate at the top, and so we'll order it in descending order. So I'm first going to write the code out that I would normally copy and paste if I didn't know how to loop. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this and make sure it works first. There we go. It looks pretty good. Montana, 1 lead, but that lead did convert. South Carolina, 2 leads that I guess both of them convert, 100% conversion rate. North Carolina had 2 leads. One of the 2 converted, 50%. And then Ohio and Texas is 1 lead each. None of them converted. So we've got this, and we want to do this for all of our other variables. Now, in this case, we only have 3, so maybe it doesn't make sense to loop in this case, but you can imagine we might want to look at this for all kinds of other variables. You might have a list of 10, 20, 30 variables that you need to loop through. And so imagine copying and pasting this 20 times and trying to manage all of that. Much better to do a loop here. So again, here's how you would do it manually. So we'd kind of copy this and paste it, and then I'd say, okay, well, I want to do the same thing, but this time I want to do this with the marketing channel column. And so now I'm going to, wherever I had state in the previous one, I'm going to substitute marketing channel. So in the select statement and the group by statement, I'm updating that, and now I'll run this. Okay, cool. Now I get the same thing for marketing channel. I can see that social media had the highest conversion rate, followed by paid search, followed by direct mail. And then I could do that for the month as well. And so in this case, doing it manually, not too bad. But again, what if you had a lot of variables here? And I'm repeating code. I'm pretty much repeating the whole thing except for line 49, what the variable I'm selecting, and line 53, the variable I'm grouping by. Not ideal. If I wanted to change something in the code, like maybe redefine this percentage converted or bring in another variable into this, I'd have to update it in, right now, 2 different places. But if you had 20 different variables, 20 different places, all different reasons why you'd want to set this up as a loop. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to delete this copied version here. Now, in order to successfully execute on our looping use case, we're going to need to use several variables. Before we can set variables, we need to actually create them. The way to do that in SQL is with a declare statement. So we'll start with the declare keyword, followed by the name of the variable. This can be anything, but it needs to be consistent. Whatever name we give to this variable here, we need to use when we're referring to that variable later on. And it starts with an @ sign followed by the name we want to give to this particular variable. So in this case, we'll create a field called fields, or a variable called fields. This is going to represent all the fields that we want to loop through, separated by commas, that whole list. So it'll be called fields, and then the last thing that you include in the declare statement to create a field is what is the data type of that field. And in this case, it'll be in nvarchar up to 100 characters. So that'll be our fields. We've successfully initialized our fields variable when we run this. But we're also going to create several other variables that we'll need as well. We're going to create a variable for the particular field that we're on in that instance of the loop. So this will only have one field versus fields will have a comma separated list of fields that we want to loop through. So field, it'll also be an nvarchar 100. And then what we'll do is we're going to reference the position of the comma for that particular field. And so we're going to need to also create this will be an integer column because it'll represent the position of a particular comma in our field string here. So we're going to call this comma, and it will be an int type, an integer. And then lastly, we are going to do something, a very advanced SQL concept called dynamic SQL, where you can actually dynamically put different fields into our SQL query. In this case, we're going to want to dynamically enter the first field we're selecting by and the field we're grouping by. So we'll use dynamic SQL. The way it works is we'll actually create a text of a SQL query that we want to run. I'm going to call that text query in this example, and then we'll execute it. So we need to create another nvarchar here. Now this is a whole SQL query, so I'm going to give it up to 1,000 characters. You may need to increase that if you have a really long SQL query. But now we've created these four variables that we're going to be using in today's looping use case. Now that we've created these four variables, we're going to initialize some of them. So we'll start with the fields list. What fields do we want to loop through today? We'll start with the set keyword. Set, and then @fields is the variable that we're wanting to update. So we'll say set @fields equals, and this is where we would pass through the comma separated list of columns in this case. So ours is state, marketing channel. Each one's going to be separated by a comma. We could use other delimiters if we wanted to. We just need to be consistent when we refer to things later on in our loop. Marketing channel, and then I believe the other one was called lead submission month. Lead submission month. Now we're really gonna use the comma position here to do some figuring out of which variable to go to next. So I'm going to add to this. I'm gonna make it separate from this string so that it's really easy if someone wanted to go in and add another field, to just go in and add it to this part. But at the very end, we need to make sure we have a comma, the way we're going to execute on this loop. And I'm going to go ahead and add a comment here and say update list with comma separated list of variables to loop through. All right, so we've got our list of fields. Now we're going to skip the field for now because we'll actually set that within the loop, but we will need to set and kind of initialize our comma field. What we want this to represent is the position of the comma for the current field that we're on. So we'll start with state, and so in this case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is what we would want it to return. Well, the way we can get that is to use a function in SQL called CHARINDEX. And what you do is you pass it a particular string that you want it to return the position for, and then we'll do a comma, and then this will be the string that we want it to search. In this case, it'll be the fields variable. It'll be this string that we just set here. And if we set it up like this, it'll start from the very beginning of the string and return the position of the first comma. In this case, it should return a 6. That would be the initialization of it. So we've initialized a few variables here, and we're finally ready to start our loop. And a loop in SQL, we're going to use something called a while loop. And so we'll define from the very beginning while, and what we're going to do is reference this comma field and say, while comma is greater than 0. What is that about? What does that mean? Well, what this does is at the point in the loop where we can no longer find a comma, it will return a 0. And so that'll be a signal of if it is a 0, it means it didn't find any more commas in the string, it means you can stop the loop. It's very important to not have an infinite running loop. So we need to make sure that this scenario where the comma field, a variable, will eventually be 0, does eventually occur. So what we're going to do each time is once we finish doing our select statement on state, we will delete the state comma here. That'll be one of the last parts within the loop. So after it goes through state, it'll go through marketing channel, and then each time it's getting rid of that variable name and the comma that's after it. And then finally, lead submission month and the comma that's after it. There'll be nothing left. It'll be searching an empty string, and at that point, it'll say, yeah, it is 0. This char index will return 0 if it can't find the comma in this case, and so it'll stop the loop. Now the next thing we need to do in our loop is use the begin keyword. And I'm going to go ahead and put the end keyword, just bookends for your loop. And within this begin and end, we'll want to indent, and the first thing we're going to do is update the field variable for that particular iteration of the loop. Let's go ahead and do that. Say @field equals, and I'm going to use a function in SQL called left. So what this will do is return everything to the left of a particular position within a particular string. So that string is fields. It has our whole list of variables, and we're trying to grab the first one in this case. So we'll feed it the fields variable, and we are going to tell it to do everything left of a certain position. What position? Well, remember here, we got the position of the comma, which would be position 6. In this case, we don't want to include the comma, and so we'll do that position of the comma -1. So everything to the left, position 5 in this case. Position 6 is where the comma is, so E to the left, it's going to return state. So now we have the variable that we're interested in, at least for this first iteration of the loop, in a variable called field. That's a great start. And what I'm going to do is actually print the name of this field so we see which iteration of the loop it's on. So what we can do is use the print command here, and I'll say variable equals, and you can use plus to concatenate strings together. And so we'll say variable equals, and then it'll print out whatever that field is, just to tell us which field we're on in the loop. Now we haven't done any SQL yet, but I want to show you the mechanism by which eventually we'll get to the next variable and the next variable within this fields list. So eventually we'll put some SQL here. We'll skip that for now and just kind of set up the core of our loop. But after that SQL runs, in fact, I'll just put a comment in here, enter SQL here. We will want to update our fields list here. So in order to do that, we will set fields to basically remove the variable that we've already looped through. So there is a function in SQL, lots of useful functions in SQL, almost anything you can imagine. So stuff, and then in this case, we're going to refer to the stuff function starts with whatever field you want to start with, in this case fields, and then we'll feed it a character. Okay, so we're going to, a starting character, so it'll start with 1, and it'll, in this case, and whatever comma happens to enter in that equal in that particular loop, we're going to say 1 through comma. So in this case, it's 6. 1 through 6. We want you to stuff that with whatever value we put here. In this case, it's a blank, so it'll just get rid of it. So what will happen here is fields is going to get updated to remove whatever variable plus the comma is at the beginning of that fields list. So after the first iteration of this, the fields list here will be updated to just marketing channel and lead submission month with a comma at the end. Perfect, perfect. So the only other thing we need to do here is update our comma field, because now the position of the comma for marketing channel is going to be quite a few other more characters than it was for state. So we've already figured out how to set the comma right here. So we'll just copy this, and at the very last thing on the loop is it's going to update the comma field variable. Great, and then we've got our end at the end. Now again, we haven't put any SQL here. It's not going to run any SQL at this point, but I believe we've set up the structure in such a way where it is going to loop through each one of those variables, each time updating the field variable, which will make our SQL part here very simple. We're just going to be putting on a different field, a different value for field each time. Let's run this, and what we should see is 3 things printed: state, marketing channel, and lead submission month. Let's just make sure we've gotten this base structure set up right. So I'm going to highlight all of this, click execute. Okay, it looks like we've got an error here. It's saying it's on line 60. Here we go. Looks like I forgot to use the set keyword here. So when I'm setting a variable, I need to start that line with set. Let's try it again here. Ah, very cool. So see, we've got 3 things printed out here: variable equals state, variable equals marketing channel, and variable equal lead submission month. Now I probably would want to put another space after the equal sign there. Look a little bit better. Let's try running that. There we go. Very cool. Now all we need to worry about is putting our dynamic SQL here. Now here's where we would start. This is why I would start by creating the SQL for at least one use case, like we did here. We know this looks good for state at least, but we want to see this with just entering a different value for state and the group by and the select statement here. So let's copy that right here within our loop block. Perfect, right? Well, if we run it this way, it's going to run it for state each time, right? There's nothing dynamic here. In fact, let's just do that, and you'll see that it hasn't done anything different each iteration of the loop. Yep, we've got it split out by state 3 different times. Not very helpful. So instead of doing that, we need to update this to reference the @field variable. So let's do that. Now keep in mind that this @field could potentially have spaces in it, so we may want to put some brackets around it that could handle the special characters in the name. We'll try running this at first. And notice that we get invalid column name. So what needs to happen here is we need to put this in a string. That's why we created this query here. I'm going to go ahead and start with set, and we're going to set the query variable equal to, and I'm going to start it with a single quote here and close it with a single quote as well. In fact, I might put the single quote on its own line here. I think that should be fine. What we need to do though is kind of stop the quote at the point at which we get to this @field. The @field does not need to be in the quote. We don't want it to be in the quote, but we do want to include it. So what we're going to do here is have a text here starting with a single quote and then ending with a single quote. And then whenever we have whenever we need to refer to a variable, dynamically insert a variable, we're going to put a plus @field and then plus, and then we'll start the rest of the string that is fixed, so to speak, from there. So then we're going to go all the way through here. Okay, we get to another at field. We need to close off that quote. So we've got this whole string that'll be part of our SQL query. Another plus sign to add in the field dynamically here. Another plus sign, and then the rest of it's just going to be, there's no more at symbols here. There's no more dynamic fields being added into the query here. And so we've got our final text here. So what this will do is it'll create a query. In fact, if we wanted to just see what the query looked like, we could copy the print statement here. And in this case, say query equals at query. So it'll print the query here as well. It's not going to run it because it's just a text variable called query. We will eventually run it. We'll just do this as a test. See how it looks. Okay, state. Query, we've got a query here. It inserts state into the select statement and the group by statement, exactly where our at field is, 2 times there. And then marketing channel does something similar. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. So how do we actually execute this query? We've got the query as a text in this at query variable. How do we execute that? Well, we could simply use the exec command, exec open parentheses, and then at query, refer to the variable that has our query here. And I'll comment out the print statement now. This is probably a really simple way that'll work for most use cases. Run this again. Oh boy, look at that. We've got 3 outputted tables here. One that breaks it down by state, ranked by their lead conversion rate. One that breaks it down by social media channel, ranked by their conversion rate, and then lead submission month as well. Imagine if you had 20 variables or 100 variables that you needed to do this exact manipulation for, and you've just done that for 100 different variables in just a few lines here. And if you ever needed to update all 100 of those queries, you'd update it right here, one place instead of 100 places. That is the value of loops. So very exciting to see that. Now, actually, technically, we could have just taken this SQL here, this string, and put it right here. We didn't necessarily need to create a variable for the query in this case. But sometimes it can be advantageous to set this up as a stored procedure. And an example of why you might need to do that is if you had anywhere in your SQL query that was referring to single quotes, you can imagine if I add a where statement here and I say where the state variable, that's fine. But when I do equals NC, I need to use single quotes for that. It's going to break this because it sees this single quote as stopping this string right here, right? It doesn't know how to handle this NC. So if we use this, if we set this up as a stored procedure, we can handle a situation like that. And I won't walk through how to handle that particular case here, but you just have a lot more flexibility if instead of just using an exec statement by itself here, we actually have it execute SP, stored procedure, and then execute SQL. And then the last part of the statement is simply the query that we want to run. So there's a lot more flexibility here if we needed it to handle those single quotes that we might need to refer to in a case when statement or in a where statement when we set it up like this. So this will work as well. And in order to do this, we need to have our query set up as text like we did here. We set a variable with query that equals the text of this. We're executing store procedure here, and then we feed it the query that's being ran. And there's more arguments that can be added to this if you did need to kind of refer to some single string, single quotes within your SQL query as well. So let's go ahead and run this. We should get something very similar. Yeah, same thing. So again, If it's a simple use case like this one, you could just use exec around your string here. But if you need to do more advanced things, this SP execute SQL gives you a little more flexibility. And that's our use case today. Now, if you're using this in a website environment or an application environment where users could be entering certain information, then you're going to pass those fields to this query. Be careful with that. You've probably heard of SQL injection attacks, where someone can enter in a form a particular SQL statement to extract information back. You want to be very careful about this. But if you're simply doing some analysis and you need to loop through a list of repeated actions that are just slightly different each time, wow, loops are fantastic. Now what you could do from here, I'll leave this up to you, is you could not just have it output maybe 3 different tables here, or it could be 100 tables if you're looping through 100 variables. You might want each one of these to kind of be stacked together and to have a consolidated table that has, here's the field, here's the value of the field, here's the number of leads, here's the percentage converted, all stacked together in one convenient table. Maybe you visualize it in a dashboard from there. So if you wanted to do that, you could initialize a table outside of the loop and then turn this select statement into an insert statement. Obviously, you'd have to add the name of the field to the query here as well. I'll leave that to you if you want to create a consolidated table, all of your cuts, one table. And if you'd like to see that in a future video, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to create a video on it as well. Well, that's it for our looping video. Hey, if you like this video, please consider liking it formally. And if you'd like to see more videos on SQL and all kinds of other analytics platforms and techniques, even leadership techniques, please consider subscribing to our Value-Driven Analytics channel. And if you have any questions about the looping content we went over today, please consider leaving a comment and I'll do my best to respond in a timely manner. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.